You are listening to Fantha Tracks.
Because of the following special program, Wonder Woman and the Incredible Hulk will not be presented this evening.
It's time to get all your Star Wars news in a single file. This is Making Tracks. Here are your hosts, Mark Newbold and Mark Mulcaster.
It's not true. That's impossible.
You're listening to Making Tracks and a very special episode where I sit down with Kyle Newman to discuss his new documentary, A Disturbance in the Force, which takes a close look at the making of the Star Wars Holiday Special. So here's myself and Kyle talking about the Star Wars Holiday Special, the documentary A Disturbance in the Force, and plenty of other things. Kyle, tell us all about everything you can about A Disturbance in the Force. What came together to make you and your team want to make this a reality?
So I came into the process, I wasn't the first one in. Steve Kozak, he's one of the co-directors, producers. He has a background in image licensing, image usage, footage. He's worked a lot with talk shows and late shows in Hollywood, and his family has a long affiliation with Variety and talk. His father worked, I believe, with Bob Hope, etc. So he had this idea in the back of his head for a little bit, and he obviously knew where a lot of the key figures were and how to get in touch with them, including the original writers, directors, etc. So it began with Steve, and Jeremy Kuhn was a friend of mine. Jeremy's the other co-director, who was also producer and editor. Jeremy and I worked on Raiders, the story of the greatest fan film ever made. And that was a project Jeremy directed, and I came in to exec produce and help with that one. And I've known Jeremy for a long time. He's also one of the brains behind Napoleon Dynamite. And I was a fan of stuff he created for ages, and we just bonded over Star Wars and such. And Jeremy told me about this project, so I immediately got involved. Like I said, they had the beat on every single living original person involved. We're talking costumers and dancers and stage managers, Lucasfilm liaisons, writers, directors, everybody that had touched the holiday special. So it was a quest to try to get to the heart of how this thing came about, why it came about is incredibly important, and also to establish this large context. The context being Star Wars didn't invent the variety show. The variety show was a horrendous format that preceded the existence of the Star Wars Holiday Special. Star Wars was simply plugged into something which was created prior to having multiple channels and cable. It was something created where you could turn on the TV after dinner and everybody in the family could watch something and get a little bit out of it. You might get a Hollywood star. You might get a musical number. You might get a skit. You get a famous comedian. As someone in the documentary puts it, it was meant to appeal to everyone and satisfy no one. And Star Wars was plugged into this thing out of desperation to keep the movie in theaters and relevant. And there's a great story in there about why George Lucas was kind of almost goaded into greenlighting a lot of these strange appearances you see Star Wars making, Richard Pryor, Bob Hope, etc. And Lucas was motivated to keep the movie relevant past Labor Day. And that's why you started to see him getting on Donny Osmond and things like that. So it really gets into 70s television culture, variety show culture, and it looks at Lucasfilm in that unique period between building up the brand of Star Wars in 1976 and how it then launched it and then expanded it 77, 78, 79. It's a very unique time period where what they did with the brand would not have been permissible had it been 1981 post Empire Strikes Back. So you're going to see some very strange, behavior, characters interacting that shouldn't. You're breaking almost this unspoken wall a canon's established. And a lot of that's really solidified post-Empire. But in 1977, right after Star Wars, it's free-for-all. It's the Wild West. And that's where this holiday special comes in. So it's exploring that through the voices of all the people who made this. And it's got this great celebrity commentary on it because a lot of people saw this when it came out. A lot of people were affected by it. A lot of people couldn't miss this. And some of them loved it. And some of them had their hearts broken by it. And we've got everybody in it from Seth Green, Weird Al Yankovic, Kevin Smith, Paul Scheer, Taron Killam from Saturday Night Live, Patton Oswalt, Bonnie Burton, who used to work at Lucasfilm. We've got major collectors like Steve Sansweet and Gus Lopez. It's a real great cross-section of people that have been affected by the brand and a really dense analysis of it from the people who actually made this thing, boots on the ground. It's not just theories. It's people who can recall what happened on what shooting day and who made what choice So I think it's the best way to experience the holiday special because you're going to get a lot of the holiday special, but it's also going to be filtered in a way that's hilarious. And you're going to see the best version you've ever seen of the holiday special. These clips are astounding. So the thing I love about this movie is it doesn't have a mean bone in its body. It's positive. It's optimistic. It's hopeful. It's like what Star Wars should be, but at least looks at it in a very real way and not just say, oh, this thing was trash. You leave, I think, with a newfound appreciation and an understanding. And it gets into the psyche of George Lucas and how that may have affected him, the decisions he makes and how he handles the brand moving forward past this into the rest of the original trilogy and beyond.
It feels like when Star Wars came out, it was very much a Fox thing. And obviously Lucasfilm were producing Star Wars for 20th Century Fox. And Empire is its own baby with its own financial issues and so on. But by the time we get to Jedi, of course, it's George's and it moves on from there. As you say, at this time period in the 70s, you can't imagine anything like the holiday special happening outside of something very tongue-in-cheek, outside of the 70s, because as you say, it was very much a 70s thing. So as a moment of time, no Star Wars movie is locked in its era more than Star Wars 1977 is. When you went in and you and the guys were starting to dig into stuff and work out how you were going to format this, given that you wanted to put a positive spin on it, how much information did you learn about the making of this thing?
It's fascinating. There is so much. It blows your mind every time I watch it. I mean, every time I'm in it too. They interviewed me and I've seen so many cuts of it. Every time I watch it, I laugh. There's so much. I just laugh because there's these crazy anecdotes and you're like, this is not real. There's no way. You look at it and it was people just going to work and doing their job. And they all thought they were making the next Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, the next like holiday classic. They thought this was Frosty the Snowman. They thought this was the movie that was going to play every Christmas. They thought this was the movie that was going to play all the time. Yeah. And it wasn't. And it's hard to think that Star Wars had its second foray into mass media. This is television. TV Guide was misbilling it as like a sequel to Star Wars of sorts, etc. And it failed. It failed miserably. It never aired again. And so course is corrected. Empire Strikes Back comes out. The love for Star Wars didn't diminish in culture. The world still embraced it. It's still got Time magazine covers. It got sequels. It's, the most successful toy brand ever. You've got all these things, but the holiday special could have derailed it, but it didn't. It just disappeared. And maybe that's because it was this time where, it could just air once and disappear. Nowadays, the interesting thing, the special got a renaissance. It had a resurgence in the 90s when comic book convention culture popped up and people could proliferate these VHS tapes. And it had a second lease on life after it was forgotten. And we get into that too. I think that's a big part of it is when a lot of people like myself discovered it, going to conventions in the 90s and getting a VHS copy of something that you'd only heard about. You'd seen it in Starlog or something, but now you could watch it. And then the internet. Obviously now you can just go online right now and watch it. I wouldn't advise doing that, but you can. And you can fast forward right to the moment, and that's what's interesting about it. So this thing won't die. Lucasfilm would probably hope it would die, George. I think he's moved past it. I think, he said everything he could possibly say about it. But there is a story here. It's a fascinating story. And it's one of those undocumented curios because no one wants to talk about it. That it was really exciting to look at that and hear all these people's, personal anecdotes and all these different people's recollections about this thing and putting it all together to really paint a portrait of late 1970s. What the landscape of Star Wars was like, what that void while you're waiting for Empire, that excitement and how this did or didn't fill that for people. That was the most exciting stuff, the personal stories. And we have a lot. I mean, we've even got like Pete Sears from Jefferson Airplane / Starship, who performs in it. His stuff about it's awesome. And there's even stuff we didn't even put in. So there was a wealth of information, which all was mind blowing to me because I had never had the opportunity to, I think it's the research you do. It's getting these people on camera. You learn so much. And there's really been no reason for anyone to aggregate all this conversation around this moment in Star Wars history. So this is it. And I think it's really definitive. It's really comprehensive. We're very proud of it. And it's not that we tried to take a positive spin. It's just that once you put it in context, you understand nobody did this maliciously. And there's just maybe some mismanagement. Maybe some of the wrong people were put in charge of things they shouldn't have been. That all comes to light. We follow it chronologically. But it's one of those things you get to the end of it and you're like, you can watch it again and again. It's really enjoyable. That's why no one comes out looking bad. It's not like we didn't make this thing to say so-and-so's at fault and blah, blah, blah. George Lucas looks pretty good, I think, in this whole thing. It's not really, the blood isn't on his hands. It's just one of those things that happens, and everyone moves on from it and everyone learns a lesson.
Hi, this is Ethan Sachs, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
Were you given a good amount of free rein to just crack on and do it? Because you must have been surprised that nobody's ever thought to do a documentary to this level of that before, because there is an interest in it. It is a curio of Star Wars.
It's that we were so far removed from this thing. So you can go back and sit with these people. This is, work they did, they were paid for, and they have great perspective on it. And they're very open about it. It's not like they're promoting something that's being released this year and they have to be cagey and ride a party line and say good things about everyone. They can just be honest. Like, we shot for 28 hours. People were passing out. It was terribly mismanaged. You hear these stories. And it's because we're almost 50 years on from it. So it's good that we got these stories on film, that we have these voices collected, aggregated in a very entertaining way. So the story of it is documented, because that's what you want to do. You want to go just without prejudice, roll your sleeves up, dive in and say, what is the real story? And let the story surface. Let the story tell itself. It's not that there was some agenda or theme or goal with this. It's not a people versus George Lucas type thing where people are already condemning something. It's just like, okay, let's talk to the people who did it, and the story will tell itself. And I think that's the honest, clean way of doing this. And that's why I think the movie's like an entertaining breeze, because people just felt, safe to go tell their exact experience. That honesty is always what you crave when you're making a documentary.
Documentary is now made. Where can people find it? Where can people see it?
We can't say all the details yet, but imagine yourself being able to go to one of your many readily available devices on your television or game system, popular apps, and being able to rent or watch it in December. All those details will be coming soon. But in terms of screening, we do have a screening coming up at Doc NYC coming in mid-November. We've got screenings at the Alamo Draft House in the United States coming at the end of November. So you can check all over, I think it's 10 different cities the film will be screening there, including one in Los Angeles on November 30th that I'm doing. And I'll be doing the Q&A with Paul Scheer, who's in the film, who is hilarious, and Seth Green, who's just a legend. And there is going to be one coming to the UK, which you posted about, November 16th. It is coming to the Prince Charles Cinema in London, and that will be the UK debut of the film. So Australia, Canada, United Kingdom, United States, those regions should be readily accessible pre-Christmas, I'll say. Beyond that, all the details will keep unfolding on the Disturbance in the Force website. Versions of the movie. The version that's coming out that will be debuting in the theaters and in London, that version is new. No one's really seen that yet. Right. That'll be debuting at the Doc NYC just prior to the London screening. That is the final version. There was a festival version, which was out at South by Southwest, and we've been very thankful because the movie was not made for a lot of money. It's very economical, almost, I would say, simple. But that's the beauty of it. It doesn't need to be complicated. It's a very simple story where the people are the stars. The voices of people who made this are the stars. It's not overcompensating in any way. It's just a very straightforward, simple, awesomely fun thing. It's just great. It wasn't expensive and it didn't need to be. We screened this thing and you learn about it as you screen it. But we were afforded these wonderful reviews. I think we're as of now we have 27 reviews and we're still 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. I think that's a testament to people coming in and saying, you know what, you don't have to spend a ton of money to tell a good story. They don't have to go hand in hand. I think it's the style that Steve and Jeremy brought to their documentary filmmaking. It's the vibe we establish. We're interviewing people and they feel safe to open up, and it's the point of view that it takes and how it's curated. And I think that resonates with people, and there's a lot of cynical stuff out there right now, and there's a lot of negativity. And this is a time capsule to, I think, a very nostalgic and special time in people's lives. And even if you weren't alive then, or you don't know much about it, but you do have that hunger for Star Wars, you are going to be blown away by it. It's got a great heart to it.
And kids today, they know about Life Day. They know about the story of the faithful Wookiee. They know about the Amban rifle that's in Mandalorian. So there's a lot of connective tissue to the holiday special that's out there in the broader Star Wars realm at the moment. So I would imagine certainly there'll be a lot of interest coming back on the documentary purely because of that, quite apart from old farts like me who want to see it because, it's kind of the era that we got on board with Star Wars in the first place.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's like they're loosening on things. Forever there was this embargo on it. You couldn't talk about it or even allude to it. But you said Mandalorian. There's been everything from Gentle Giant to, other brands have put out memorabilia, mostly Boba Fett animated, faithful Wookiee-centric merchandise. But theme park is now starting to do stuff with Life Day shirts. Life Day's been mentioned in Mandalorian. They did Life Day Lego specials. You can go get the Life Day orb. Right now, today, sold out everywhere is the Chewbacca Vintage Collection 3 3/4-inch carded Life Day Chewbacca in his red Snuggie with the globe action figure. I couldn't get one. I want one. It's you wouldn't have dreamed of that 5 years ago. I mean, that figure, I look at that figure and I'm like, that's just proper. It makes me want those action figures that never came out, those Kenner ones, the prototypes of Itchy, Lumpy, and Mala that were, those are supposed to be figures 20, 21, 22, 23 in that classic line. But it harkens back to the special time where you're like, look at that. That's what Star Wars was back then. It was that simple. It was that pure. It was like Star Wars Christmas, And if this didn't pave the way for that back then, you wouldn't see Guardians of the Galaxy Christmas special. You wouldn't see Star Wars Lego Christmas special. So there's a certain comedy that comes with it because this is ingrained in our pop culture. This holiday special is iconically bad, but also it still is iconic. That's the key word there. And it has, opened up the floodgates for other IPs to do funny things with holiday specials. I don't know what it is, but our culture's got something, we have this soft spot for holiday time. And in the UK, it's always about the number one single at Christmas. And you've got all these classic Christmas movies and people love to, be inside with their hot chocolate and with their family and watch a Christmas movie. And, it's strange that this one, they were hoping this would be the one, and it wasn't, but here it is almost 50 years later and it endures. That's why this is a story worth telling, the how and the why. And it's one of those things I'm very proud to be a part of.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video, and social media feeds, bookmark FanthaTracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
You mentioned other IPs. I've got to ask, you've been involved in the world of Dungeons and Dragons recently. Tell us a little bit about that.
I got a book that came out early this month. What month are we? No, we're November. It's jumbled. So there's 2 books coming out this fall. One came out in early October. One's coming out in early November. The first one is called Lore and Legends. That is a sequel to our Hugo-nominated Art and Arcana, which is a visual history of Dungeons and Dragons, which is, if you don't know, it's a role-playing game. It's a phenomenon. It's had this storied history. It's an infamous game, but it invented a new American art form in the form of role-playing games that got spread around the world, and it spawned so many iterations, even a Star Wars role-playing game, which I grew up and loved playing. Multiple brands have put out their version of the Star Wars role-playing game. And without Dungeons & Dragons, this world of role-playing, wouldn't have happened. And also, the Star Wars role-playing game was so foundational and influential on Star Wars's expanded universe. I mean, the naming of creatures, the expanding of, the Mos Eisley spaceport for Tatooine Manhunt, like what games like the trading card game did and the role-playing game, they really opened the floodgates for the exploration of the IP. But then the novels went and explored further. And D&D was the preeminent role-playing game. It put role-playing games on the map. It still is the biggest role-playing game on Earth. It's played by over 50 million people. The first book explores the origins of D&D, Art and Arcana. And then this next book is really a spiritual sequel to it. So it looks at what happened in 2014 when the game was, in the 5th edition, rebirthed to the world. And this phenomenon that happened, because the game was almost dead before that. And so we were looking at this meteoric rise of the game going from nearly dead to back to the pinnacle of pop culture. Just had a movie come out. All these celebrities are talking about how they used to play D&D, how it informed their desire to be an actor, or showrunners like Craig Mazin and the Game of Thrones guys talking about why they became showrunners and how dungeon mastering is actually just showrunning. And it looks at all this myriad of ways in which the culture helped resurrect D&D and D&D helped inform the culture, informing the principles of video games and all these things. So it's a look at the modern iteration of the game, a very contemporary book. And then the other book is a sequel to Heroes Feast, our New York Times bestselling cookbook, which sounds strange. You have a D&D cookbook and it's a New York Times bestseller. You're like, what's going on in this world? We didn't anticipate that, but it spawned a sequel that comes out November 7th everywhere. And in addition to that, they just announced today that the D&D didn't announce a date, but they announced the dates because the D&D cooking show, it's called Heroes Feast, the show based on the original book, is debuting this month as well. Part of Hasbro's slate of shows, D&D centered shows. So we've got the sequel cookbook and the cooking show coming this month, which is really exciting to have a book you wrote be translated into a 20 episode, 1 hour cooking show. So
Yeah.
I was a consulting producer on that. I'm also in with my co-authors on all the episodes, espousing different lore when applicable, D&D lore. I also had a D&D board game come out this year that I co-designed called Trials of Tempest in association with WizKids. And I'm also at work on the Dungeons & Dragons 50th anniversary documentary, which I co-directed and exec produced. So that's coming next year, 2024, for the 50th anniversary. So I have been doing a lot with Dungeons & Dragons. That's a brand that I adore. And I know you were tweeting about this recently, Taylor Sith. I had a video that I had done for Taylor Swift for her 1989 Taylor's version album remaster for a track called Clean come out this past week, which is cool. So I like to, get involved in all aspects of pop culture.
I was going to say anything from the 70s and 80s, because obviously Taylor's from the 80s, strictly speaking. So what other thing would you want to get your hands on if somebody said, Kyle, take your pick? What would you go for next?
I really love what Terry Matalas is doing with Star Trek. What he did with Star Trek Picard.
Yeah.
I'm enjoying Strange New Worlds. If I was to say what is the one thing I watch all the time, it's not Star Wars on Disney Plus. I watch Star Trek Next Generation pretty much on repeat on Paramount Plus. I think the easiest things, most enjoyable things for me to watch are probably Next Gen and maybe Antiques Roadshow. I could just leave that stuff on all day and just enjoy.
Hey man, it's me, Kevin Smith, a Star Wars fan, Fantha Tracks fan.
I would love to do something with Star Trek at some point. Obviously, Star Wars remains the thing I love the absolute most. I love Dungeons and Dragons, so if there's more to do in that world, of course. I connect with all these different things. I do, I was a big fan of He-Man, the Masters of the Universe. G.I. Joe was something that I adored. GoBots. I like all this stuff. I think there's a way in. Sometimes you watch these big event movies and you just feel like, who are the people doing this? Why are they doing this? And why did they choose that way in? And you have to find the relevant way into these things and make it an enjoyable experience for people that don't know it, and also not alienate the people that helped make it what it was. You just have to find that relevant way in. And it isn't always saying, oh, we're going to subvert it, what was there before. We're going to make the dark version of it, or we're going to throw out what came before and redo it, just because it's really because you don't understand it. I think people do that as a knee-jerk reaction because they're afraid to get it wrong for the core people, and then they don't even care about them anyway. There's a really flawed paradigm that I see happening with a lot of big IPs, quote unquote big IPs, and how people approach them. And you can approach these things far more positively, far more hopefully than it is right now. There's so much cynicism. People think, oh, we have to make, we got to make He-Man a former murderer. And, it's just like there's a negativity to it where just because you're miserable doesn't mean you have to bring your misery to these beautiful things. I think there's a lot of great IP out there that's just sleeping. I could kill a Realm the Space Knight. I don't look at anything and say, oh, that won't work. There's always a way. Look what James Gunn did with Guardians. James is brilliant, taking a lot of tertiary characters or almost irrelevant characters and resurrecting them. There's some stuff I'm doing with some public domain stuff that's also big IP, but there's public. This is like a passion project. I'm writing something like this right now. It's just one of those genre blending, mind blowing things that kind of blends all these tones and all the things that I love. I do a lot of comedy stuff, but I do like more than comedy. I like everything. I like the movies that give you every emotion. And I think you can bring that to a lot of quote unquote old IP or tentpole stuff. It doesn't have to all be lowest common denominator storytelling.
Thank you, Kyle, as always. We'll definitely speak again soon.
Oh, thank you, man. Appreciate it.
If you want to be part of the action, visit fanthatracks.com or be sure to comment, like and share on our social media feeds at Fanthatracks. Send in your listeners' questions by emailing radio@fanthatracks.com. Subscribe, leave a review, preferably a 5-star one, on Amazon Music, Audible, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcatcher or smart speaker of choice. And as always, thanks to James Temple for composing the Fanthatracks intro, Adam O'Brien for our Making Tracks opening music, and Mark Daniel and Vanessa Marshall for our voiceovers. Tune in to Good Morning Tatooine. It's live Sunday evenings, 9 o'clock UK, 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific on Facebook, YouTube and Twitch, and check out our Fanthatracks Radio Friday night rotation every Friday at 7 o'clock UK time for new episodes of The Phantom from Down Under, Planet Leia, Desert Planet Discs, Start Your Engines, Collecting Tracks, Cannon Fodder, and special episodes of Making Tracks, and every Tuesday at 7 o'clock UK time for your weekly episode of Making Tracks. And remember, Fanthatracks.com, our social media feeds, Fanthatracks TV and Fanthatracks Radio are absolutely free. So no Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee, Kickstarter or Indiegogo required to stay updated on all the latest Star Wars news.
Until we catch up with you again, may the Force be with you.
Coming up next on Fantha Tracks Radio, it's another episode of Making Tracks.